Hey guys, tonight we are going to explore the tragic story of Catherine Howard, the 19-year-old who turned the Tower of London into her rehearsal space for placing her head upon the executioner's block before facing death. Catherine Howard, the fifth Queen of England to Henry VIII, reigned for less than 18 months and became the victim of a ruthless political machine where youth and beauty were treated as commodities to be consumed and discarded. What could have driven an innocent young woman to pay the ultimate price with her life? Tonight, we will trace the accusations of adultery, the courtly conspiracies, and the pervasive fear of an authoritarian regime to uncover her fate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you are watching from and what the local time is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Within the cold, merciless walls of the Tower of London, Catherine Howard, the 19-year-old Queen, endured her final, haunting hours. As the clock struck the first moment of her execution day, she continued rehearsing how to place her head upon the executioner's block, hoping to greet her fate with what little dignity she could salvage. Her reign of 18 months as Queen was far too brief to grasp all the intrigues of Henry VIII's court, yet long enough for her to become prey within its ruthless political machinery. Catherine Howard was born around the year 1523 into the powerful Howard dynasty. Her grandfather was the Duke of Norfolk, who wielded control over the family and a portion of the realm. Her grandmother was the Duchess of Norfolk, known for her strictness and little concern for her granddaughter's emotional well-being. Her father, Lord Edmund Howard, was the Duke's brother, but enjoyed far less prestige, living in the shadow of debt. Her mother, Lady Joyce Culpeper, was celebrated for her grace, yet rumoured to have had numerous love intrigues before marriage. Catherine was the youngest among many siblings, growing up in a spacious house, but one devoid of genuine affection. As her parents were frequently occupied with social dealings and consolidating power for their lineage, from early childhood, Catherine was betrothed to one court family and then transferred to another, her destiny treated like a pawn, exchanged between rival factions. Under the patronage of her step-grandmother, the Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine was brought to royal residences to learn courtly manners, dance, sing, and mingle with nobility. There, she revealed delicate features and an effortless charm that kindled admiration. Yet it was precisely this upbringing without proper guidance that led her into youthful relationships that would later be wielded against her in accusations. In the year 1540, Henry VIII, the king who had endured 4 bloody marriages, hungered for a male heir, and lived in constant suspicion, unexpectedly set eyes on Catherine among Anne of Cleves's ladies-in-waiting, altering the course of her fate. It was not pure love, but a calculated strategy of power that made Catherine the 5th Queen, barely 17 when she ascended the throne. She was hailed as a new light for the realm, bringing hopes of Catholic reconciliation and a revival of Howard influence. Catherine's beauty and innocence rekindled Henry's waning passion amid his failed marriages. Their wedding took place on a summer day in 1540, mere weeks after the annulment of the Flanders Princesses' Union. From fragile lady-in-waiting, she became empress amid both admiration and envy. In her first months, Catherine earned affection from servants by intervening to lighten sentences for offenders, particularly those punished for matters of conscience, earning her a reputation as a compassionate queen who understood the suffering of the weak. Yet that beauty and compassion proved ephemeral. Catherine had scarcely had time to attempt to produce a prince when allegations of adultery with Sir Thomas Culpeper, a charming courtier with close royal access, besmirched her. Her elegant winter gowns could not conceal the anxiety in her eyes upon learning of the investigation. Her childhood secrets and clandestine affairs with the music teacher Henry Manox and courtier Francis Derham were dragged forth as evidence of high treason. Catherine, the innocent 19-year-old, found herself accused of acts she had never intended as cover for her youthful naivety. Thus, amid the wind-whipped nights of London and the echoing footfalls of guards on cold stone, Catherine entered the darkest chapter of her life. Once known for her bright laughter, for leading devotional readings in the chapel, and for offering sympathetic counsel to royal physicians, she was branded a traitor by a series of charges. From the luminous glory of the throne, her life veered into shadow, bound by the iron chains of Tudor justice, a realm ruled by suspicion, betrayal, and fear. A few months after her coronation, Catherine lost not only her royal authority, but her very right to live. In the frigid mists of February 1542, the 19-year-old Queen entered the Tower of London one final time, not as a noblewoman, but as a condemned criminal. The Tudor court's final whisper stripped away every privilege. The charges of treason and adultery suffice for her to face the Emperor's blade. Thus, from the icy scaffold of the Tower of London, we have followed Catherine Howard into the fateful chapter of her life. Now, let your spirit settle and take one more step into the vast tableau of England. 1540, where religious storms collide with political crisis and a regime of fear prevails, so as to understand how a 17-year-old maiden like Catherine was swept into that ruthless machine of power. England in 1540 lay awash in religious upheaval. The break from Rome fractured faith. Once prosperous monasteries were dissolved, and rival Christian factions, Protestant and Catholic, fought fiercely for influence. Amid that whirlwind, politics grew harsher than ever. Henry VIII, now past 40 years of age, pursued his demand for a male heir with iron resolve. Regardless of morality or tradition, not only did he reject the Pope and destroy the monasteries, but he also sacrificed 2 wives, whom he had once publicly wed. Each time a head fell, the blade's ring served as a grim reminder. No one, not even behind the title of Queen, was guaranteed safety. Within the labyrinth of courtly power struggles, factions spun webs of intrigue like spiders. The Howard family, with their centuries-old lineage and wide-reaching influence, recognized a golden opportunity to reclaim status. They set their sights on Catherine, 17 years old. Fresh and innocent as the perfect piece to overturn Thomas Cromwell's disastrous alliance. Cromwell, the ruthless chief minister, once wholly trusted by Henry, had imperiled the throne with his ill-fated marriage to Anne of Cleves, inciting the king's wrath and shaking the realm's foundations. The Howards decided to bet everything on Catherine as their trump card. In a candlelit secret council, the Duke of Norfolk and his Howard advisors mapped out their plan. They exploited Henry's greatest weakness, his hunger for youth and power, even as his body wasted away from agonizing leg ulcers and a foul stench that repelled all but the most loyal. They promised the king a bride who was young, pure, and of steadfast Catholic blood, a beacon to revive the confidence of traditionalists. Catherine, beautiful and bearing Catholic connections, swiftly became the ideal candidate to shift the political tide. During the early months of 1540, England resembled a full-blown police state. Spies lurked throughout the royal palace and crept into private homes. A single whisper through a keyhole was enough to land one in the treason ledger. The knock on the door, in the dead of night, sent shivers through every household. Uncertain whether it heralded a magistrate or a guard to seize someone, the palace itself became a gilded prison, where flattering smiles masked concealed daggers ready to draw blood. Amid that crisis, Catherine Howard, who had grown up without genuine affection or tight guidance, entered the royal court bewildered. She possessed no political savvy, only her natural innocence and purity. She was coached on how to curtsy, how to smile, how to receive praise. Yet that very lack of experience made her vulnerable to the trap of fame, the trap of power, and ultimately the trap of her own life. Under the palace's splendid lights, Catherine was presented to Henry amid thunderous applause and lavish flattery. She became the subject of all conversation, the fairest woman in the court. The hope for a shift in religious policy, the new light for a dimming realm, yet with just one glimpse of her clear eyes. Henry was captivated. His longing to witness youthful vitality made him forget the pain that racked his joints. Though illness racked him, he lost himself in Catherine's presence, as if he rediscovered himself through the image of the 17-year-old maiden. Then, when the royal drum sounded, signalling a special assembly, Catherine was proclaimed the fifth queen. The applause and music swelled. But in that moment, Cromwell's supporters pressed their lips in silent worry. They understood that power did not lie solely in the crown, but in whomever could capture the sovereign's heart in his hour of vulnerability. Less than a few weeks later, their wedding took place under the summer sky. Amid fluttering banners, Catherine, too attired in a pristine white silk gown, stepped from the palace doors, unaware that in just months she would face merciless interrogations. Meanwhile, the people and nobles of the realm beheld only the dazzling pageantry, oblivious to the coming storm, thus emerging from the savage political landscape. Catherine Howard embarked on her own tragic narrative, soon to be ensnared by a merciless whirlpool of power. She, the innocent girl with a heart yearning for life, could not have imagined that the resplendent palace was in fact a vast trap, awaiting the moment to plunge her into darkness. As the Tudor realm drew its breath in hushed stillness, Catherine's timid footsteps entered the maze without ever perceiving the danger that loomed ahead. Catherine lost her father at an early age and was sent to live with her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. First at Chaworth and later at Horsham, one might have expected these grand homes to provide strict guidance and moral instruction befitting a noble young lady. Instead, they became clandestine academies of romance. The elderly Duchess, preoccupied with her own affairs, neglected Catherine's upbringing, lodging her in a communal dormitory alongside older girls who delighted in secret trysts and whispered rendezvous. By the time she was 13 years old, Catherine had already fallen under the sway of her music tutor, Henry Manox. He wielded the power inherent in the teacher-pupil relationship, guiding her not only in melody, but also in physical intimacy. He taught her how to conceal their meetings from watchful guardians, instructing her in the art of deception, what lies to tell, which routes to use, and how to feign innocence, if confronted. For Catherine, these lessons felt like part of her education, a dangerous but intoxicating extension of her daily studies. When her liaison with Manox ended, Catherine's affections quickly turned to Francis Derham, a gentleman pensioner in the household, barely admonished by her step-grandmother. She embarked on a deeper bond with Derham that involved more than stolen glances. They exchanged gifts, spoke of marriage in hushed tones, and referred to each other as husband and wife, so convincingly that many in Horsham believed their vows genuine. Derham promised Catherine a future together, an oath sealed by tokens of love. A ring here, to a lock of hair there, symbols that would later become damning evidence. Within the dormitory's shadowy confines, the girls developed a silent curriculum of courtship. They shared tips on writing love letters with invisible ink, sending signals hidden within floral arrangements, and arranging secret meetings beneath moonlit eaves. What might have been considered harmless, youthful flirtation became a clandestine art form. Yet when Catherine ascended to the throne, these same skills were recast as acts of moral corruption. The letters she once treasured as tokens of affection were rebranded as proof of depravity. Thus, the experiences meant to be innocent, passages of adolescence were twisted into pillars of accusation. Catherine's early romances, affairs that should have been protected, were weaponized to besmirch her character. The very techniques she learned to navigate teenage love, stealthy letters, cryptic symbols, concealed rendezvous became evidence of wickedness before a court that demanded absolute purity from its queen. Deserted by any real mentor, Catherine had no context for the gravity of these clandestine liaisons. In her sheltered world, she believed she was simply exploring the bounds of affection. She did not foresee that her youthful indiscretions would be dredged up years later, distorted into allegations of betrayal. When whispers of her past reached the ears of Henry VIII, they formed the scaffolding of charges that would dethrone her. At court, advocates of the Bill of Attainder meticulously combed through archived love letters and sworn testimony. They portrayed Catherine's dormitory romances not as naive flirtations, but as premeditated conspiracies against the moral order of the realm. The maidens of Horsham, once companions in secret, were summoned to testify, their recollections weaponized to prove that Catherine had betrayed her marriage vows before she even donned the crown. In the eyes of Tudor justice, there was no allowance for youthful mistakes. The court insisted that Catherine's actions displayed a consistent pattern of deceit, first with Manox, then with Derham evidence, they argued, of a woman entirely unfit for queenship. Her lack of rigid supervision was held against her. The Duchess of Norfolk's neglect was deemed irrelevant. Only Catherine herself bore the blame for what the court deemed calculated immorality. So, the young queen, once celebrated for her youthful beauty and charm, found herself standing before an unrelenting tribunal. Her past had been laid bare: the late-night meetings, the hidden tokens, the passionate words scrawled in coded verse. What should have been private memories of first love became the foundation of a betrayal charge that promised only one outcome. Catherine Howard, who had been guided into those secret affairs by those entrusted to protect her, was left to face the consequences alone. The court's rigid moral expectations allowed no room for understanding the naivete of a teenager swept up in a world she did not fully comprehend. In this merciless context, her youthful indiscretions ceased to be mere missteps and were recast as acts of high treason. Thus, in the winter of 1541, Catherine's early loves were paraded as evidence of her unworthiness. The dormitory lessons in hidden messages and forbidden rendezvous, once thought innocent, had sealed her fate. The very tools she learned to navigate teenage romance became the instruments of her ruin, placing her firmly in the grip of a court that demanded unwavering chastity from its queen, and nothing less than her head would satisfy their demands. Stepping into the year 1540, Catherine found herself appointed as a lady in waiting to Anne of Cleves, a role that placed her directly in the path of Henry VIII at a moment when he loathed his loveless marriage. While Henry had once smiled upon the union with Anne, that alliance soon proved disastrous. The king, filled with regret and resentment, sought distraction and solace. Catherine's youthful beauty, natural grace, and steadfast Catholic heritage presented precisely the antidote he desired. To many in the court, she embodied the hope of restoring the Howard family's fortunes and reversing the tide of Protestant reform that had swept the kingdom. Within mere weeks of Anne's annulment, Catherine was elevated to queen, becoming the fifth woman to wed Henry. Their wedding in the summer of 1540 was at once a grand celebration and a funeral for the former marriage. Catherine, barely 17 and unschooled in the perils of power, married a man nearly 3 times her age, a monarch who had already executed 2 wives. The whirlwind pace of events left Catherine's innocent soul reeling. She could scarcely grasp the tragic pattern into which she had been thrust. In the early days of her queenship, Catherine experienced a semblance of joy, albeit a fragile one. Henry showered her with affection, doting upon her in a manner he had not with his previous wives. He bestowed upon her jewels once worn by his former queens, a poignant recycling of royal treasures that spoke volumes of his capricious nature. Catherine, in turn, delighted in the ceremonial pomp of her station, adorned in sumptuous gowns, seated upon the dais at lavish banquets, and greeted with fanfare at every step. Her heart swelled with the power and privilege of the throne. Yet beneath this opulence lay an uneasy tension. Compassion soon became one of Catherine's defining qualities. She intervened on behalf of certain prisoners, even those incarcerated for their religious beliefs, demonstrating a generous spirit that endeared her to many. In her short reign, she granted clemency to men and women who had offended the crown, including those condemned for defying the new Protestant orthodoxy. This kindness, rare in a court accustomed to severity, painted Catherine as a merciful queen who understood the suffering of the weak and unwelcome. Yet behind the glittering facade of courtly life lurked a network of spies and schemers. The Tudor court was a tangled web of informants, each ready to report the slightest infraction or indiscretion. Every gesture Catherine made her lowered gaze. Her gentle touch was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Whispers travelled swiftly from one corner of the palace to another, magnifying innocuous remarks into veiled sexual overtures. In this environment of perpetual surveillance, even the most sincere acts of compassion could be twisted into evidence of romantic impropriety. Catherine's inexperience at court made her an easy target for those who coveted her influence. She lacked the political acumen to distinguish between genuine counsel and manipulative flattery. Men who sought favour with the king used her proximity to advance their own plots, treating her as a means to an end rather than as a person of worth. Some courtiers whispered that her kindness was a calculated gambit, meant to earn loyalty, while others spread rumours of secret liaisons, eager to see her downfall. Despite her genuine desire to serve others, Catherine's every move was interpreted through the lens of suspicion. When she interceded for a prisoner, detractors claimed she did so in exchange for romantic promises. When she smiled at a courtier, gossipers suggested it was an invitation to scandal. The palace walls, though splendidly decorated, echoed with the rustle of lies and half-truths. In this realm, a queen's innocence counted for little. What mattered was who controlled the narrative. As Catherine navigated these treacherous waters, the weight of her crown grew heavier. The very compassion that had once won her hearts now fueled envy and deceit. Each act of mercy was catalogued and scrutinized, each generous gesture twisted into proof of ulterior motives. She found herself walking a perilous tightrope, her balance threatened by the breath of a single whisper. Thus, Catherine Howard's early days as queen were marked by a bittersweet duality, the joy of youthful elevation and the sting of relentless intrigue. She had entered the court hoping to revive her family's fortunes and bring a measure of kindness to her realm. Instead, she discovered that power carried a hidden cost, one paid in the currency of trust, reputation, and, ultimately, her own security. In the hushed corridors of the palace, amidst the clatter of armour and the flutter of silken skirts, Catherine's gentle spirit faced its greatest challenge, surviving the very court she had been raised to enchant. As Henry grew increasingly frail, tormented by festering leg ulcers and prone to violent outbursts, Queen Catherine found herself under mounting pressure to produce a male heir, an obligation that had already claimed the heads of two of Henry's former wives. With no child in her womb, her favour waned. Every glance, every softly spoken word became material for scrutiny. Ladies in waiting and court officials alike transformed into spies, passing secret reports to rival factions eager to exploit any misstep. Amid this atmosphere of suspicion and pain entered Sir Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber and almost the same age as Catherine. His presence offered her a breath of fresh air compared to the aging monarch. Culpeper, gifted with the privilege of unfettered access to the royal apartments, gradually found opportunities to express his admiration. What began as longing glances and furtive compliments soon blossomed into clandestine meetings within the vast corridors and hidden passages of the palace. Jane Rochford, the widow of George Boleyn, played a pivotal role in facilitating their affair. She delivered notes sealed in wax, arranged secret appointments, and guided couriers through the maze of servants' quarters. Catherine's letters to Culpeper, penned in her own delicate hand, brimmed with passionate declarations. My heart stands still at the thought I cannot ever be always in your company lines that struck at the core of her desire and loneliness. These same letters would later serve as damning evidence, each carefully preserved word turned against her. The lovers devised a system of coded signals. A curtsy here, a folded corner on a page there. Culpeper would leave a book by the chapel door, a familiar bookmark signalling Catherine to slip away under the veil of pretense. Their rendezvous took place in secluded gardens after hours, in unlit stairwells, and in small closets behind tapestry-lined walls. In their earnest pursuit of companionship, they unwittingly built the framework for the very charges that would condemn Catherine. To Henry, already volatile and embittered by illness, these secret trysts were the final proof of his queen's betrayal. In his eyes, Catherine's youth and inexperience were eclipsed by a pattern of calculated adultery. From her first indiscretion with Manox to her betrothal with Derham, and now her affair with Culpeper, each relationship became a brick in the prosecution's case. No longer could Catherine's gentle intercessions for prisoners or her compassionate interventions be remembered. Instead, the court portrayed her as a schemer who had deliberately undermined her marriage vows and plotted against the king. And so, piece by piece, Catherine's private life was torn into the light of Tudor justice. The love letters, once tokens of her affection and solace, were recited aloud in the Privy Council chambers. Witnesses described seeing her slipping through corridors with a man whose very presence was an affront to royal dignity under interrogation. Culpeper admitted to meeting Catherine in secret, though he denied consummation, an admission that only deepened Henry's wrath. For Catherine, every fond memory of stolen kisses transformed into a nightmare. The whispered poetry she once treasured now echoed like an indictment. In that steel-cold environment, affection equated to treason, and the tender bonds she had formed were cast in the harshest light. The magnified impact of those youthful errors, once hidden in Horsham's dormitory and the Tower's chambers, now spelled her doom. As autumn waned into a cold winter, Catherine's world contracted to the cold walls of her chambers and the icy gaze of her interrogators. The dreams of a Howard restoration, the hopes of reviving Catholic traditions, and the fleeting happiness of her early months as queen vanished beneath the weight of suspicion. Her spirit, once buoyed by compassion and youthful ardour, sank under the relentless pressure to account for every heartbeat, every letter, every clandestine meeting. Thus, Catherine Howard, who had entered the court as a bright new hope, found herself ensnared by the very secrets she had shared with those she trusted. Each romantic gesture a folded note, a shared glance had become proof of high treason. The tapestry of her life, woven with innocence and longing, unravelled thread by thread, leaving only the stark strands of accusation. And in the hush that followed, the Queen realised that, in Henry's unforgiving eyes, her youthful passions were no better than a crime against the crown itself. In the autumn of 1541, the veil over Catherine Howard's past was abruptly lifted when John Lascelles, a zealous Protestant reformer, stumbled upon evidence of her youthful dalliances with Henry Manox and Francis Derham. Troubled by the implications, Lascelles seized the documents and hastened to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, who found himself torn between his religious duty and a profound fear of Henry VIII's wrath. After many sleepless nights, Cranmer resolved to send a private letter to the king rather than expose Catherine publicly, hoping to shield himself from suspicion while honouring his conscience. Upon reading the secret missive, Henry was consumed by confusion and fury. At first, he refused to believe that Catherine, whom he had trusted and adored, could betray him so completely. But as testimony emerged from Derham and Manox, and then from Sir Thomas Culpeper, the king's doubt turned to enraged certainty. He summoned his councillors and ordered the arrest and interrogation of Catherine's former lovers. Under the cruel mechanisms of Tudor justice, the rack and the thorny question bones cracked and confessions tumbled forth in agony and fear. Francis Derham and Henry Manox, subjected to savage torture, divulged intimate details of their relationships with Catherine. They confirmed the secret engagement and described clandestine meetings in whispered tones. Sir Thomas Culpeper, once a favoured courtier, was accused of facilitating those liaisons. He, too, was thrown into a grim cell and subjected to relentless questioning. Under such unbearable pressure, some admissions may have been extracted through coercion rather than truth. Yet they proved sufficient to convince Henry of high treason. Even Jane Rochford, Lady Roosevelt, George Boleyn's widow, and the go-between for Catherine and Culpeper, fell under suspicion. She endured grueling interrogations as the court sought every detail of the Queen's secret correspondence. By the end of November 1541, Catherine was formally isolated within the Tower. All her writing implements and correspondence were taken away to sever any link to the outside world. Only a handful of loyal attendants remained by her side. The interrogators focused obsessively on whether she had entered a binding betrothal with Derham before marrying Henry, a revelation that would invalidate her queenship and cement her status as a traitor. Catherine's answers, hesitant and often contradictory, reflecting both legal ignorance and sheer panic, only convinced the king that her heart harboured treachery. In a matter of weeks, this extrajudicial proceeding metamorphosed into a legislative persecution. Henry convened an emergency session of Parliament to pass a Bill of Attainder, an unprecedented measure allowing him to condemn Catherine without a formal trial. The coercion implicit in royal command and the court's simmering animus meant that no member dared to speak in her defence. The machinery of state bowed to the monarch's will, and the sovereign's hand reached down to decree the fate of his young queen with chilling finality. Parliament enacted the bill at breakneck speed. There was no time for debate or appeal. Catherine's name was stricken from the rolls of innocence, her memory defamed as though she had never known grace. Her marriage was declared null and void, and she herself was labelled a traitor both to crown and country. The royal decree fell like an icy wind through the corridors of the Tower, leaving Catherine to confront her doom alone. During those long, cold days, Catherine was allowed only brief, guarded visits from her chaplain and her most faithful attendants. She lay on her simple pallet, her heart heavy with sorrow and regret. Outside, the frost bit at the stones of the fortress. Inside, the flicker of torchlight revealed a queen once accustomed to velvet and finery, now draped in plain grey. Her mind wandered through the corridors of memory, the laughter of happier days, the promise of youthful romance, the rare moments of genuine affection she had shared. As the final summons drew near, Catherine resolved to face her fate with whatever dignity remained to her. She studied the few devotional texts lent by her chaplain, seeking comfort in prayers and psalms. By candlelight she whispered apologies for her past errors and expressed her enduring loyalty to God. Even as she acknowledged her earthly failures, each word was a soft lament, a fragile hope that her last confession might grant her peace beyond the merciless world she had known. Then, in a final act of preparation, Catherine requested that the executioner's block be brought to her cell. She practiced lowering her head with calm deliberation, determined that her last breath would be taken with the same composure she had once shown as queen. The sight of her bending forward, measured and serene, defied the cruelty that had been sworn against her. When the dawn of her execution day broke, Parliament's bill had already sealed her destiny. No council, no jury, no advocate could alter the king's decree. And so, at first light, Catherine Howard was led from her cell to the scaffold within the Tower walls. The hush of the winter morning enveloped her, a solemn witness to the tragic end of a young life caught in the unforgiving tides of power. In the end, Catherine's story was woven into the tapestry of Tudor history, not as a cautionary tale of moral failure alone, but as a testament to the perils faced by a woman thrust into the vortex of politics and passion. Her youthful indiscretions, recorded in torture chambers and parliamentary acts, had become the very basis for her condemnation. Yet, in the quiet dignity of her final hours, she reclaimed her narrative, an enduring whisper that even in darkest times, a solitary soul may stand with grace before the abyss. On the 25th day of November, in the year 1541, the English Parliament, acting under the formidable pressure of Henry VIII, swiftly passed the Act of Attainder, condemning Catherine Howard for treason and adultery. Rather than convening a regular court where Catherine might have had the opportunity to call witnesses or present a defence, the Bill of Attainder empowered the King to coerce Parliament into issuing a direct verdict, bypassing her right to common law trial and any semblance of due process. This moment crystallised the extent to which royal prerogative could subjugate the legal system, silencing all who might dare to oppose the monarch's will. The Act laid out three principal charges against Catherine. First, that she had concealed her earlier liaisons before marrying the king. Second, that she had carried on an adulterous affair with Sir Thomas Culpeper. And third, that she had conspired either in word or in deed against the life of Henry himself. The evidence presented was drawn primarily from the confessions of Francis Derham, Henry Manox, and Thomas Culpeper, alongside the love letters Catherine had penned. Although it was widely understood that those confessions had been wrung from men under torture, their truthfulness was never questioned by the court. Instead, they were accepted as incontrovertible proof of Catherine's guilt. The process by which the bill was enacted unfolded with astonishing rapidity. No member of Parliament dared to raise an objection. There was no open debate. No formal arguments on Catherine's behalf. Each assembled, lord and gentleman, understood that to challenge the king's desire was tantamount to political suicide. In the span of only a few days, the legislative machinery ground through its motions, sealing Catherine's fate before she could assemble a defence, call counsel, or appeal to the mercy of the people. News of the proceedings travelled quickly across London. For common folk and nobles alike, the spectacle of a queen reduced to a criminal before Parliament served as a stark warning under Henry's dominion. Even the monarchy's own consort was not immune to the king's ruthless justice. Whispers rippled through taverns and marketplaces, carrying tales of how the highest offices of the land could be turned into instruments of vengeance. The fear that gripped the realm deepened. If a queen could be condemned without trial, what hope did lesser subjects have? Almost immediately after the sovereign's seal was affixed to the Act of Attainder, Catherine's status as a citizen and queen vanished. She was stripped of all titles, her name expunged from the official court records, declared a common criminal. She was remanded to the Tower of London, her cell no longer containing the silken cushions of royalty, but rather the bare stones of penitential confinement. The order was given that she remain there until the day of her execution, an end that Parliament had already determined necessary. For Catherine, the swift passage of the bill extinguished any last glimmer of hope for a transparent trial or a merciful pardon. The public, having witnessed the spectacle, saw her not as a once-beloved queen, but as a cautionary emblem of Tudor severity. Ballads circulated, portraying her as a wanton transgressor, deserving of her harsh fate. The image of the young, beautiful queen was replaced by that of a fallen woman, punished without compassion. In the corridors of power, the Act of Attainder further cemented Henry's absolute authority. By demonstrating that Parliament would yield without question to his demands, the king sent an unmistakable message to all levels of government. The monarch's will reigned supreme, unconstrained by ancient legal safeguards. For the nobility, this confirmation of royal supremacy bred a profound unease. Many quietly questioned whether their own privileges might prove equally fleeting if they ever found themselves at odds with the king. Meanwhile, Catherine languished in her tower cell, her memories of luxury overshadowed by the cold reality of her predicament. No letters, no visitors, no recourse to appeal. Only the patient ticking of the clock, each second drawing her closer to the scaffold. The Tudor justice she had once found so remote now loomed over her with merciless certainty. In the courts and chambers where she had once presided as queen, her portrait was removed, replaced by reminders that no one, not even a royal consort, could evade the iron hand of judgment. Thus ended Catherine Howard's brief, tumultuous tenure, a queen in title alone until the final moments of her forced confinement. Her downfall, expedited by an act designed to circumvent all protections, became a chilling testament to the perils of power, untempered by mercy. And in the dim corridors of the Tower, Catherine prepared herself for the ultimate price exacted by a king who brooked no challenge to his authority. From the 10th day of February, in the year 1542, Catherine Howard found herself confined within the narrow royal apartments that once housed female prisoners. The heavy oak door closed behind her, cutting off the world of silken gowns and courtly splendor she had known. Only a handful of her most loyal attendants remained by her side, watched over by Sir John Gage, the King's stern Lord Chamberlain. Every personal item, pens, ink, paper, was confiscated, leaving Catherine with nothing but a few well-worn prayer books to sustain her. Each morning, the hush of dawn was broken by the arrival of interrogators. They came one after another, their questions always returning to the same haunting inquiries. Had she lied about Francis Derham? What had truly passed between her and Henry Manox? Did she deceive the king when she claimed innocence? The relentless repetition of these lines of questioning pushed Catherine to the relenting Henry Manox, brink of despair. Some days she wept openly, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Other times she sat in mute rigidity, eyes vacant as though she drifted beyond the stone walls. Her once plump cheeks had hollowed, and her eyes carried the dark rings of endless nights without sleep. She felt the fragile thread of her life grow ever thinner. Yet, amid those teeth-gnashing moments of panic and sorrow, Catherine revealed a strength few expected. She spent hours in silent prayer, clasping the edges of her prayer book so tightly her knuckles blanched. She meditated on psalms, reading each verse with quivering voice, seeking refuge in the promise of divine mercy. She never cast blame upon her accusers. Instead, she asked only to die with dignity. Such resolve became chillingly apparent when she requested that the executioner's block be brought to her cell. Night after night, by the dim glow of a single lantern, she practiced the precise angle at which to rest her neck, determined that her final act be carried out without tremor or pleading. In quieter moments, Catherine turned her thoughts outward. She dictated farewell messages through her chief attendant, asking forgiveness for any pain her actions had caused. She implored that her servants, those brave souls who had remained, be cared for after her death. Each instruction was phrased with tenderness. Ensure Margaret receives her annual pension. See that John continues his duties without fear of reprisal. Tend to the children of Lady Blanche, who had nursed Catherine during her illness. Her concern for others, even as her own life ebbed away, brought tears to her attendants' eyes. They wept as they transcribed her words, knowing these letters would be the last testaments of a queen undone. Catherine's final letters bore no blanket denial of every charge laid against her. Instead, she stressed her lack of intent to betray the king or the realm. Pleading for understanding of a 19-year-old's naivete and ignorance of the law's complexities, she wrote, "Pray remember that in youth's bloom, one lacks the wisdom to foresee consequences grave, as those now set before me." In each carefully chosen phrase, one felt her genuine remorse and a heartfelt desire to atone, even though any hope of leniency seemed extinguished. As winter's chill seeped through the heavy stone, Catherine's days followed a slow, mournful rhythm. Dawn brought the interrogations, morning brought fragile moments of prayer, afternoon brought the dictation of her letters, evening brought the solemn task of rehearsing her death. All around her, the Tower remained silent witness to the unravelling of a life once poised for greatness. In the hush before her final night, Catherine sat by a small window. Watching the faint glow of candles from distant towers, she lingered over the last words of her most tender letter, sealing it with trembling hands. Though her heart ached with sorrow, there remained within her a quiet flame of hope, not for earthly salvation, but for peaceful rest beyond the world that had betrayed her so mercilessly. Thus, in the fading light of that cold February eve, Catherine Howard prepared to meet her fate with the same dignity she had long sought. Bound by ropes and shackles, she would walk to the scaffold at dawn, her spirit buoyed by faith, and the knowledge that her final letters carried the weight of her true self flawed, repentant, and unbowed. And as the stones of the tower lay mute around her, Catherine's last testament whispered of the tragic cost of innocence, caught in the relentless gears of power. In the grey light of dawn, on the 13th day of February, in the year 1542, Catherine Howard was led from her narrow cell through the cold stone corridors of the Tower of London. The path to the scaffold wove past grim walls that had witnessed countless fates, and at its centre stood the very spot where Anne Boleyn had met her end 6 years earlier. This echo of history deepened the haunting symbolism of Catherine's final walk, clad in a simple black velvet gown and draped in a white linen kerchief. Catherine moved with measured steps beneath the flickering light of tallow lamps. No throng of spectators crowded the courtyard. Only a handful of court officials, her devoted attendants, and a few royal guards formed a small, silent audience. This subdued gathering was arranged deliberately to muffle any murmur of sympathy that might undermine the grim purpose of the morning. Before the executioner raised his axe, Catherine offered a brief prayer, her soft voice barely carrying across the hush. She then inclined her head in a graceful curtsy to those assembled in acknowledgement of her station, even in the face of death. With serene composure, she knelt beside the executioner's block and positioned her chin squarely upon its rough surface, tilting her neck so that the seam aligned perfectly with the edge. Her arms, folded gently across her chest, matched the exact posture she had practiced in private, a testament to her determination to face her end with dignity rather than terror. In the next instant, the French executioner lifted his axe. A single, swift stroke sealed her fate. Catherine Howard's life ended in a cloud of dark crimson, her body falling away from the block as quickly as it had been placed there. The blade's descent was executed with the precision for which the imported executioner was chosen, sparing her the agony of a botched beheading. In that fleeting moment, the 19 years of her tragic journey, her hopeful youth, her moment on the throne, and her ultimate downfall came to a solemn close. Her body was swiftly collected and transported to a small, unmarked grave within the tower's chapel grounds. The burial was conducted quietly, without ceremony, to erase any lingering traces of the youthful Queen's presence. It lay adjacent to other nameless Tudor victims, their shared anonymity forming a silent testament to lives extinguished by the Crown's uncompromising authority. In the days that followed, the exact location of her resting place was concealed, preventing any pilgrimages or tokens of remembrance. Shortly before Catherine's execution, Jane Rochford, Lady Rochford, had also been brought before the block, accused of facilitating the secret meetings that sealed the Queen's fate. Her execution completed the harsh eradication of the Howard faction's influence. With both women gone, the Howard name lay in tatters, their power purged as decisively as the unauthorized romances that had so threatened Henry's absolute rule. In the capital's streets and taverns, there were no public tears for Catherine's passing. A heavy silence wrapped the city, as if the very air had been stilled by the finality of her death. Her story served as a chilling reminder in Tudor England. Even a king's wife could find herself ensnared in the relentless gears of politics, only to be ground to dust when power demanded it. The quiet that followed her end spoke volumes, no lamentation, not mourning, but the sober message that any soul entering this labyrinth of intrigue risked destruction, whether queen or commoner. And so the tower's ancient walls closed in on their latest victim, while the realm beyond carried on, perhaps a little more fearful, a little more guarded, knowing that the decisive blow of power could fall on any head, and that, in the end, mercy was a luxury granted to none. The death of Catherine Howard sent shockwaves through the Tudor court and ignited fervent discussion across the realm. In the immediate aftermath, Henry VIII secured the passage of a new statute. Any woman who would wed the king henceforth must disclose her entire history of romantic involvements. This measure, proclaimed to prevent a recurrence of a fifth matrimonial scandal, also bore the unmistakable imprint of Henry's obsession with virgin purity and his own insecurities after 5 failed unions. The law mandated a level of scrutiny that turned private memory into public record and framed consummation or its absence as a matter of national security. With that single stroke of legislation, the Howard faction's influence evaporated completely. The Duke of Norfolk, once the power behind Catherine's rise, found himself arrested and charged with treason. He narrowly escaped the executioner's block only because Henry's own life ended on the eve of his scheduled beheading. The Howards, a dynasty that had for generations commanded respect and authority, fractured under the weight of their association with Catherine's downfall. Their wealth was seized, their alliances dissolved, and their proud name became synonymous with disfavour and disgrace. In the wider religious landscape, Catherine's ruin shifted the balance decisively in favour of the Protestant reformers. Those who had hoped for a Catholic resurgence through her influence were left disillusioned. Henry, though still autocratic in his beliefs, found renewed justification in curbing Catholic sympathies within his court. He enacted new edicts to reinforce royal supremacy over ecclesiastical matters, effectively stifling any lingering hope for a return to papal allegiance. Protestant leader, emboldened by Catherine's fall, pressed forward with reforms that would reshape the English Church for generations. Over the ensuing centuries, historians revisited Catherine Howard's brief, tragic life with fresh eyes. In modern analyses, scholars emphasized her status as a victim of childhood exploitation. Her youthful relationships with older men reframed as early abuse rather than consensual romance. The forced confessions and the lightning-fast attainder process have been cited as glaring examples of Tudor jurisprudence run amok, where once she was labelled a wanton adulteress. Contemporary feminist interpretations cast Catherine as a pawn of patriarchal power, denied agency and condemned by laws crafted to entrench male authority. For many within the women's rights movement, Catherine Howard stands as a symbol of systemic injustice and gendered oppression. Her story is recounted as a cautionary tale of how women's bodies and reputations have long been maneuvered as political currency. The notion that a young queen could be condemned on the basis of love letters and coerced testimony remains a powerful indictment of the limits placed on women's voices in the corridors of power. Catherine's legacy endures as a chilling reminder of both the potency and the brutality that accompany absolute rule. In her life and death, one sees the embodiment of the maxim that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Her youthful energy, her compassion, and even her final acts of dignity were swept aside by a monarchy determined to preserve its supremacy. She became the tragic embodiment of a system that brooked no dissent and offered no quarter. Regardless of a person's rank or royal title, today, the tale of Catherine Howard resonates beyond the annals of Tudor history. It invites reflection on the fragility of personal freedom in the face of authoritarian governance. It cautions that those without the means to assert their innocence, especially women constrained by social and legal strictures, may find themselves destroyed by the very structures meant to protect them. Through the echoes of her life and the silence she left behind in her unmarked grave, Catherine Howard's story stands as a solemn warning. When unchecked power wields the law as a weapon, even the most luminous spirit can be extinguished with astonishing ease. In the wake of Catherine Howard's tragic end, the English Parliament moved with alarming speed to erect new legal bulwarks against further royal marital scandals. The freshly minted statute decreed that any woman who would wed the king must first make a full, public disclosure of her romantic history. She was required to enumerate every past lover by name, specify the times and places of their meetings, and submit this dossier for official review, ostensibly designed as a legal safeguard to prevent the king from being deceived again. The law in practice laid bare Henry VIII's deepest insecurities, 5 turbulent marriages marked by bloodshed and 2 executions. No longer confined to the rarefied station of a queen, this requirement expanded into a criminal mandate. Every princess, duchess, and noblewoman aspiring to royal favour now faced intense scrutiny of her personal life. Among the titled families of the realm, these draconian measures sowed a pervasive dread. Noble daughters learned that their most intimate memories, once safely hidden in the hush of drawing rooms, could transform into the very evidence of treason. In response, aristocratic households began to compile rigorous, meticulously detailed character files on their young women, hiring lawyers to vet every liaison and investigators to unearth any whisper of impropriety. Past flirtations and youthful indiscretions became points of vulnerability to be sanitized or denied before any hand could bless a marriage contract. The theatre programs and pamphlets of the day, crudely printed, passed from hand to hand, depicted Catherine's downfall as a forewarning. Beware the shadows of your past, lest the axe of justice swing for you. 2. In the taverns and market squares, the common folk added their own colour to the Queen's sorrowful saga. Minstrel ballads recounted her short life with an eerie, melodic refrain. The gentle maiden turned prisoner, betrayed in corridors of power, executed without mercy. Local storytellers wove the tale into cautionary folklore. Parents warned their daughters that any secret romance might lead them through the palace gates, only to meet a cold fate at the block. Women in simple gowns would whisper over mugs of ale that Catherine's innocence had been no shield against the king's wrath. In their retelling, she embodied the vulnerability of all women, how quickly youth and virtue could be stripped away by a system ruled by men's ambitions. Within the dwindling halls of the court, Catherine's memory lingered as a spectre of female frailty in the face of male authority. Gentlewomen serving successive queens felt the chill of her fate. They moved in silence to avoid gossip, keeping their histories scrubbed clean lest they too be ensnared. When a new candidate was presented to the king, her record was paraded before advisors with the same solemnity once reserved for legal documents. No noblewoman dared to speak freely of affection. Every flicker of emotion risked being misconstrued as evidence. In whispered conversations behind tapestry panels, ladies would murmur, "Remember Catherine," each syllable a reminder of how mercilessly the machinery of state could engulf any life. As the years passed, Catherine Howard's plight became a symbol both of the dangers inherent in royal marriage and of the broader silencing of women's voices. No longer simply a queen's private journal, her story morphed into a collective lesson on the perils of female autonomy under an unyielding patriarchy. In drawing rooms and drafty kitchens alike, her name invoked empathy and fear. Her legend, a testament to how power could crush innocence with impunity. Thus, the new laws and the hushed terror they inspired reached beyond the marble pillars of Westminster Abbey, spilling into every village and every manor. The spectre of Catherine Howard, once a bright young bride, now served as a constant admonition in a realm where the sovereign claimed absolute authority. Even the most dutiful woman had to guard her heart and her secrets lest she, too, become the axe's next fall. And so, in the trembling candlelight of England's homes, mothers and daughters alike heeded the stark admonition, preserve your privacy, conceal your past. For in Henry VIII's kingdom, nothing less than complete transparency could forestall the swift, unforgiving swing of royal justice. Beginning in the 19th century, scholarly interest in Catherine Howard underwent a marked transformation. Early historians painted her as a gold digger and betrayer, a young woman who leveraged royal favour for personal gain. Yet, as the 20th century waned and feminist perspectives gained ground, a new narrative emerged Catherine as a victim of systemic abuse. Researchers began to scrutinise her early liaisons with Henry VIII and Francis Derham through a modern lens, recognising them as exploitative relationships far removed from true consent. By today's standards, Manox's advances toward a 13-year-old pupil and Derham's courtship of a teenager amount to child sexual abuse. The fact that Catherine received no meaningful protection or guidance, particularly from her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, has been interpreted as a profound failure of adult guardianship. Central to this reappraisal is the stark imbalance of power between an elderly, affluent monarch and a vulnerable adolescent girl. Henry VIII wielded the ultimate authority to forgive or condemn, while Catherine, barely a teenager, lacked both the legal standing and the emotional maturity to advocate for herself. What 20th century scholars have highlighted is how the very letters and confessions once used to condemn Catherine now underscore the arbitrary nature of Tudor law and the pervasive hypocrisy of the male-dominated court. Instead of evidence of a scheming adulteress, these documents represent the vulnerability of a young woman caught in the crosshairs of royal prerogative. Contemporary academic conferences have further explored this revised perspective. Panels dedicated to Catherine's life have juxtaposed her plight against evolving notions of childhood and consent. Articles in peer-reviewed journals have traced the parallels between her experiences and those of countless others silenced by patriarchal institutions. Documentaries shown on public television have dramatized her story, inviting viewers to consider whether, in an era of child protection laws and human rights charters, Catherine's fate might have been different. Would she have been afforded advocates? Could she have accessed legal counsel? These are the lingering questions that resound through each discussion. Alongside Catherine, historians often invoke the figure of Elizabeth I, Henry's last queen. As a foil, Elizabeth survived the perilous tides of Tudor politics by mastering the art of public image and by leveraging her maturity and single status to deflect scrutiny of her personal life. In contrast, Catherine's tragically brief experience highlights the critical importance of bodily autonomy and mental health transparency concepts that were virtually non-existent in 16th century England. Modern scholars argue that had Catherine been allowed the right to self-determination and psychological support, she might have steered clear of fatal entanglements. Catherine's evolving legacy thus serves as a prism through which to view broader issues of gendered power dynamics. She has become both cautionary figure and symbol of resilience, her story prompting ongoing debate about the intersections of law, morality, and the protection of minors. As discussions continue in university halls and documentary screenings, Catherine Howard's name resonates not merely as that of a doomed queen, but as a poignant reminder of how deeply the roots of gendered injustice can run, and how essential it is that societies uphold the rights and dignity of those most powerless among them. The story of Catherine Howard cannot be separated from the broader tapestry of Tudor marital tragedies. When we look at her alongside Anne Boleyn, who was beheaded on charges of treason, and Jane Seymour, who died shortly after giving birth to a son, we see a grim, common thread. Each woman became a casualty of Henry VIII's urgent quest for a male heir. Anne Boleyn lost her life because she failed to produce a son. Jane Seymour's life was claimed by the risks of childbirth in her attempt to secure that heir. Catherine Howard was condemned on allegations of adultery before she could even attempt motherhood, and Anne of Cleves had her betrothal annulled because Henry deemed her unattractive. Each marriage was marked by the same overriding ambition, to secure the throne's succession by male line. Yet there is one stark divergence in Catherine's downfall. Anne Boleyn, even while coerced into confession under duress, was granted a mock trial, a public spectacle of legality. However sham it may have been, Jane Seymour, though she died in tragic circumstances, nonetheless received the dignity of a queen's funeral rites. Conversely, Catherine Howard was condemned almost overnight through a bill of attainder. Stripped of both power and life, without so much as a semblance of a trial or public accountability. This radical circumvention of common law procedures underscores Henry's growing instability. Rather than allow traditional legal barriers to stand in the way of his desires, he moved swiftly to eliminate any obstacle to his absolute authority. Delving deeper, we see that Anne Boleyn, well-educated and politically astute, nevertheless had fewer avenues of defense than Catherine. Despite her own forced admission of guilt, Anne had cultivated alliances and wielded influence. Yet these did not save her from the axe. Catherine, in contrast, was a mere teenager, entirely inexperienced in statecraft, and especially vulnerable to courtier machinations. Where Anne Boleyn dared to challenge the king's expectations, Catherine acquiesced to the roles arranged for her, never fully understanding how quickly the political winds could turn. Jane Seymour, often remembered for her gentle disposition and her temporary success in producing a male heir, occupied a different position. Her sympathies lay with the emerging Protestant faction, yet she never posed a threat to Henry's supremacy, and thus met a less violent end, albeit one as tragic. In Catherine's case, her youth and lack of political backing left her isolated. She stood alone behind those cold walls, devoid of both counsel and empathy, while her enemies felt no compunction in exploiting every fragment of her past. After Catherine's execution, it fell to Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, to navigate the treacherous waters more carefully. Parr survived by demonstrating loyalty, political savvy, and deference to Henry's authority, earning him a measure of affection without threatening his pride. Her maturity and caution contrasted sharply with Catherine's naivete and Anne Boleyn's boldness. Each queen embodied a particular aspect of the Tudor marital experiment: Anne Boleyn, the ambitious reformer; Jane Seymour, the devoted mother; Catherine Howard, the tragic ingenue; and Catherine Parr, the prudent survivor. Catherine's unique position as the youngest and least politically equipped queen highlights the merciless nature of Henry's reign. She was not only a victim of her own inexperience, but also a casualty of a system that allowed personal vendettas and paranoia to override established legal norms. Anne of Cleves, by contrast, escaped execution through a swift annulment, a reminder that physical appearance and timing, rather than fidelity or treason, could determine a queen's fate. In the end, the tragedies of these women reveal a monarchy driven by the imperative of male succession, a court where personal worth was measured by a woman's ability to fulfill a political function. Catherine Howard's story stands as perhaps the most poignant example of innocence caught in a web of ambition and fear. Her youth, once celebrated as a breath of fresh air in an aging court, became the very cause of her undoing. Deprived of the chance to shape her destiny, she was swiftly condemned, her fate sealed by a king unwilling to tolerate any threat to his iron rule. Thus, the Tudor annals carry the haunting echoes of four women bound by the same cruel necessity. Each queen, in her own way, bore the consequences of Henry's relentless pursuit of a son. Catherine Howard's brief chapter, perhaps the most tragic, reminds us how swiftly power can render a person powerless, and how, in a regime that brooks no dissent or delay, youth and innocence may be the deadliest liabilities of all. The story of Catherine Howard stands as a chilling admonition about the nature of absolute power. It not only corrupts those who wield it, but also destroys the vulnerable caught in its wake. In the Tudor world, the king stood as a living deity. His will was law, and statutes were mere tools to reinforce his supremacy. Under such a regime, any personal relationship, be it a stolen glance or a clandestine letter, could be fashioned into the evidence of a grand political conspiracy. Catherine, despite her efforts to maintain her dignity, found herself utterly powerless in the face of this capricious machinery of justice. From a socio-psychological perspective, her trial and downfall reveal how public opinion and the nobility could be manipulated to form a vast network of surveillance and mutual betrayal. Courtiers learned that loyalty to the crown did not safeguard them. Instead, it was the act of denouncing one's peers, of supplying the right gossip at the right moment, that secured one's own safety. The merit of chastity thus became redefined by patriarchal law, an ideal enforced only for women, while men's transgressions were treated with leniency or forgotten. In such a climate, the modern notion of human rights was non-existent. The rights of the individual dissolved under the will of the monarch. Another lesson that emerges from Catherine's tragic fate concerns the crucial role of proper education and protection for young people. Catherine's early life, deprived of sound guidance, exposed her to relationships she could neither fully comprehend nor responsibly manage. Her grandmother's neglect, the isolated dormitories at Chaworth and Horsham, and the freedom afforded to unscrupulous tutors and suitors combined to form a breeding ground for scandal rather than safety. In any era, safeguarding the welfare and psychological health of children is paramount to preventing the repetition of such personal tragedies, whether those children are princes and princesses or the children of common folk. Through the decades and centuries since Catherine's execution, her story has resonated as more than a mere footnote in royal history. It has become a timeless parable of power's darkest potential to crush innocence and warp justice when a ruler's desires eclipse the rule of law, and fear supplants compassion in the halls of governance. Those with the least power, often young women, become the most tragic casualties. Catherine Howard's brief, ill-fated tenure as queen thus remains a stark reminder that unchecked authority inevitably devours both its wielders and the innocent bystanders caught in its reach. And in that sleepy echo of her life and death, we hear an urgent call to uphold the rights, dignity, and protection of every individual against the tides of power that would see them broken. Catherine Howard's tale, though steeped in tragedy, possesses a sombre kind of beauty that lulls the mind toward rest. Picture the cold, torchlit corridors of the Tower of London stones drenched in shadow, a solitary candle guttering against the draught, and the low moan of wind through narrow windows. Imagine a young woman, barely 19, rehearsing her final act with determination rather than terror, an image both macabre and deeply moving, evoking the fragile poetry of human resolve in the face of oblivion. From this haunting vignette emerges a message that transcends centuries, no matter how ruthless power may prove. Compassion and personal dignity remain beacons in the darkest night. Catherine's quiet composure as she approached the executioner's block teaches us that the core of our humanity, our capacity for courage, our insistence on inner freedom cannot be seized. Even when our bodies are claimed by forces beyond our control, her composed curtsy, her steady prayer, and the calm precision with which she laid her head to rest all speak to the unassailable value of preserving one's integrity. Regardless of the cruel twists of fate, in reflecting on Catherine's story, we find reassurance for our own lives. Though we may never face the terror of Tudor politics or the edge of an executioner's axe, we do all confront moments that test our sense of self, moments when external pressures threaten to erode our principles. In those times, Catherine's example reminds us that maintaining compassion for others and fidelity to our inner truth can serve as a guiding star through any tempest. Even as her narrative ended in sorrow, it leaves behind the quiet legacy of a soul unbowed. So, as you let these final words drift around your consciousness, imagine the steady flame of that single candle in the tower, illuminating Catherine's last vigil. Let her unwavering spirit, rehearsing one final act of grace, carry you into your own night's rest. May you sleep in the knowledge that within you lies the same potential for steadfast dignity, an inner light that shines no matter what shadows fall across your path. If you're still awake, I hope this story has brought you a measure of calm, wonder, and gentle reflection. And if you'd like to explore more tales that stir the soul and soothe the mind, please subscribe to our channel for the newest, most compelling videos yet to come. Good night, and may your dreams be as peaceful as Catherine's final prayer.